Abandoned and betrayed, he waited until his last breath, but his owner regretted it bitterly. Jackson Matthews, a former police officer from New York, had a loyal companion by his side for 5 years, Ace, a smart and dedicated Doberman. Together, they faced countless challenges, from dangerous chases and hostage rescues to battling notorious criminals. Ace was more than just a dog. He was a partner, a friend whom Jackson trusted with his life. Their bond was not simply that of a master and pet. Jackson and Ace shared a special connection that words could not fully describe. They understood each other without speaking. Just a glance or a nod was enough. The dog was always by his side, ready to jump into action whenever Jackson needed him. Every day, they fought side by side, facing the trials and dangers of their work. But one night, everything changed. Jackson and Ace were involved in a critical mission, a raid on a dangerous drug cartel. In a remote area, Jackson and Ace were separated from their team. Facing off against armed criminals, an unexpected event occurred. In an effort to protect Jackson, Ace charged into the middle of the battle, as brave as he had always been. But this time, things weren't the same. A bullet pierced Ace's body. Jackson watched the scene unfold in silence, and time seemed to stop. He rushed Ace to the hospital, his heart heavy with fear. But when everything calmed down, the doctor delivered the news: Ace didn't make it. Jackson was devastated, but there was one more thing that forced him to make the worst decision of his life. He left Ace behind and never came back. In a moment filled with guilt, Jackson left the hospital, left New York, and moved to a small town, hoping to forget the painful memories. But no matter how hard he tried, every night when he looked at the dark sky, he still saw the image of Ace, his dog's loyal eyes haunting him. Jackson had done something he never wanted to. He had abandoned his only friend. And when he realized that, he knew deep down that he had never forgiven himself. Jackson lived in the loneliness of the small town, where no one knew his past. Each day passed, and he tried to forget the mistakes, the memories of Ace. He found a new job, a dull office job, but it could not ease his pain. Every night, he found himself sitting alone in an empty house, holding on to Ace's old collar, tears falling in silence. He tried to convince himself that leaving Ace behind was the right thing to do, that the dog would be okay, that he would find a better family. But the more he tried to forget, the more he couldn't. The guilt and pain clung to him each day. He remembered every wag of Ace's tail, every trusting glance from the dog when they faced danger together. Now, he was left alone in a world where no one else was to trust. One rainy afternoon, as Jackson was driving home after a long day at work, he unexpectedly received a strange call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but something about it made him doubt his own ears. Jackson ? The voice said, soft but filled with worry. "It's me, Tom. You won't believe this, but I need your help. Something is happening with Ace." Jackson's whole body tensed. The name Ace hit him like a shock to the heart. Everything around him seemed to stop. "Ace ? Jackson repeated, his voice shaking. "But it can't be." Tom, a former partner from Jackson's police days, continued speaking. "Ace is alive, and now he is in danger. I do not understand what is going on, but he cannot survive on his own anymore. We need to find him." Jackson's heart began to race, a flood of emotions overwhelming him. He couldn't believe it. He had thought he had lost Ace forever. But hearing these words now, part of him was scared, and part of him felt hope. "What happened?" Jackson asked, his voice trembling. Tom sighed, sounding as if he were struggling to continue. "There is some gang hunting him down, and they will not stop until... I do not know, but I know Ace needs you. You are the only one who can save him." Each word Tom spoke was like a hammer to Jackson's mind. He couldn't stay still anymore. He had abandoned Ace, and now Ace needed him. There could be no hesitation. Jackson decided to drive immediately. He didn't know what would happen, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't leave Ace again. With his wallet and phone in hand, Jackson set off, leaving everything behind. His past and future now revolved around one question: would he be able to find Ace before it was too late? Jackson drove non-stop, the headlights cutting through the pitch-black night. His mind was in turmoil, questions spinning endlessly. Ace was alive, but why was he being hunted? Who was hurting the dog? What kind of gang cared about a police dog? With every passing kilometer, his worry grew stronger. Fear and guilt tightly wrapped around him. After an hour of driving, Jackson stopped at a small roadside cafe. He stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, trying to stay awake. There was too much he didn't understand, but he couldn't let himself slow down. He called Tom, his old friend, once more. "Tom, I've come halfway. How much farther? I need to know for sure." Jackson's voice was hoarse with stress. Tom was silent for a moment before replying. "Not far now. Just 10 more kilometers to the forest, where I last found Ace." The forest? Jackson felt the tension rise. He remembered the stories of dark woods on the outskirts, dangerous areas that both the police and locals usually avoided, especially after dark. But why the forest? "Are you sure Ace is still there?" Jackson asked, his voice full of concern. Tom didn't respond immediately. The fear in his voice only made Jackson more uneasy. "Jackson, I'm not sure, but I found traces of Ace, and there is something very strange going on. The people around here, they do not like talking about it. But I think we need to be careful." A chill ran down Jackson's spine. "Careful of what?" he asked, his voice trembling. Tom took a deep breath. "There is a group running things no one dares to touch. They might not spare Ace, and they might not spare us either. I think we are dealing with something bigger than we thought." Tom's words hit Jackson like a powerful blow to the head. He never imagined his life would revolve around a high-risk chase like this. The questions in his mind kept multiplying. Was someone using Ace for something? Who was behind those hunting the dog? Determined not to let Ace suffer again, Jackson restarted the car. He drove faster, not letting himself think too much. But as he neared the forest, he suddenly realized that things weren't as simple as he had imagined. A cold wind blew through, making Jackson feel as if someone was watching him. The dark trees lining the road seemed like eerie shadows stretching out, hiding secrets he couldn't see. His heart began to race, and the tension in his body grew stronger. Could he save Ace? Would he be able to face whatever was about to happen? Just a few minutes more, Jackson knew he was about to face a terrifying truth, and nothing was certain about Ace's survival. Everything was just beginning, and he couldn't turn back. Jackson drove onto the dirt road leading into the forest, the headlights of the car only lighting up a short distance ahead. The night surrounded him, and the silence was deafening. His heart pounded harder, the anxiety escalating with each passing second. He felt like he was walking into a trap, not knowing what awaited him up ahead. The deeper he drove into the forest, the weaker the car's headlights became, as darkness seemed to engulf the entire space. The ancient trees stood still, like ominous markers guiding him toward something dark. Jackson stopped and rolled down the window, listening. Everything around him was silent, but he could not shake off the feeling that someone was watching him. That sensation grew stronger, making it impossible for him to stop. "Tom, I have arrived." Jackson's voice was hoarse over the phone. "Be careful, Jackson. If anything feels off, do not take any chances," Tom warned, but there was something in his voice that made Jackson uneasy. As Jackson stopped, the only light was from his car's headlights, casting eerie shadows on the trees. He looked around, trying to find any trace of Ace. But there was nothing but the still darkness and the eerie quiet of the forest. It felt as if everything was waiting, as though something was plotting. Then suddenly, he heard a faint sound, a noise coming from somewhere nearby, almost like footsteps. Jackson quickly turned around, scanning his surroundings. But there was no one, only the shadows of the trees and misty fog. He forced himself to suppress his fear and continued walking forward. He moved deeper into the forest, where there were no signs of life. No animal sounds, only complete silence. But in that silence, a faint breath echoed from somewhere ahead, making him jump. Jackson held his breath, staring at the sound, his heart racing. Then, through the darkness, he saw a faint light, a dime glow flickering from a distance. Jackson bit his lip, deciding to follow it. He didn't know what he would face, but if Ace was there, he wouldn't give up. The closer he got, the clearer the light became. And then Jackson stopped. His heart seemed to stop beating. In front of him was a small camp, with figures standing around it. He couldn't make out their faces, but all of them were silent. Not a sound. "Jackson, do not do anything reckless," Tom shouted through the phone, but Jackson was too close now. He couldn't turn back. One of the figures turned and looked at him, their cold gaze as if they had been waiting for him. Jackson knew he had come very close to the truth, but it would not be as easy as he thought. Was Ace really here? And who were these people? Who were they, and what did they want? Jackson didn't have time to think any further. He knew he couldn't back down. Standing still in front of the small camp, Jackson felt a cold chill run down his spine. He could sense the presence of those around him, even though they had not spoken yet. Cold eyes fixed on him, as if watching his every move. "Who are you looking for?" A hoarse voice rang out from one of the figures in the crowd. Jackson couldn't see their face in the darkness, but the voice was eerily familiar. "My friend Ace. I am looking for my dog." Jackson's voice trembled, unable to keep his composure any longer. The figure stepped closer, the weak light from a flashlight in their hand illuminating their face. It was a middle-aged man, his face covered with scars, his eyes devoid of any compassion. He looked at Jackson, then slowly spoke. "Ace? He is not an ordinary dog." Jackson felt a cold shiver run down his spine, as if something was terribly wrong. "What do you mean?" Jackson asked, his voice tense. The man sighed, then stepped aside, motioning for Jackson to come closer. He opened the door to the camp, revealing a dark, gloomy space inside. Jackson held his breath and walked in without thinking. Inside, a scene that made Jackson's heart stop unfolded before him. Ace was lying there on an old bed, with a sad expression on his face, his eyes no longer carrying the light of happiness from before. But that wasn't what left Jackson speechless. What made him unable to believe his eyes was that Ace wasn't the dog he had left behind. "What is going on?" Jackson stammered, his hands trembling. He stepped closer to Ace, but the dog did not seem to recognize him. Ace stared at him with empty eyes, as if everything from the past had been erased. "What have you done to Ace?" Jackson yelled, his voice filled with anger and panic. "He wasn't like this when I left." The man silently observed him, not answering right away. After a while, he finally spoke in a calm tone. "Ace is not an ordinary dog. We have trained him, made him stronger, but in doing so, we have made him forget his past." "His past? What are you talking about?" Jackson couldn't understand, his mind spinning. "He is not a tool. He is my friend." The man sighed. "Yes, he is your friend. But what we have done is not out of malice. We created dogs like Ace to serve a greater purpose. And you left him with us." Jackson stood there, his heart aching. He didn't know what to do. The image of Ace from the past, joyful, strong, and loyal, was now nothing but a ghost. Ace was no longer the dog Jackson had loved. "What have you done to Ace?" Jackson emphasized, his voice growing heavy with anger. The man was silent for a long time, then finally spoke. "We turned Ace into part of an experiment. A special training program. Dogs like Ace can become powerful tools, performing tasks that we need. But they have to forget their past." Jackson felt everything collapse around him. Ace had been turned into a tool, a warrior with no memory, no feelings, only a hollow shell of the dog he once knew. Pain and regret consumed him. "How can I get Ace back?" Jackson asked, his voice choking. The man simply shook his head. "You can't. He is not the dog you left behind. But if you really want to, maybe you will find a way to restore some part of his past." Jackson's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope flickering in his mind. Could he help Ace return to what he once was, even if it was just a small part of the old dog? Everything in the forest, in this camp, suddenly became hazy. But one thing Jackson was sure of, he wasn't leaving until he found a way to save Ace. Jackson couldn't stop thinking about what the man in the camp had said. The story of Ace, of his past, and the training program he had been caught in, haunted him. But all Jackson knew now was that he had to do something not just to find Ace, but to fix the mistakes of the past. The next morning, Jackson returned to the camp. The atmosphere had changed. A cold air enveloped the place, and he could feel the difference in the way people looked at him. But he didn't care. All he wanted was to see Ace again. He walked into the small house where Ace had been staying. But this time, things were different. Ace wasn't lying still on the old bed, his eyes no longer empty. Instead, he stood up when he heard Jackson's footsteps. Ace's gaze was still cold, but it no longer held the panic from before. He looked directly at Jackson, not blinking. Jackson's heart raced. This was the first time in years that he truly felt Ace's presence. The dog stood there, closer than ever, but there was still an invisible distance between them. Jackson didn't know what to do. He couldn't rush this. He knew their relationship couldn't be rebuilt in a single night. "Ace, I am here," Jackson said, his voice soft but full of determination. Ace didn't move, just watching him cautiously. Jackson knew Ace had not forgotten what had happened. He couldn't come back just because of a few words or a single meeting. Their past wasn't so easily erased. Jackson slowly sat down, not looking directly at Ace, but instead staring at the ground. He wanted Ace to see that he wasn't in a hurry, that he didn't intend to make him feel scared. "I am sorry, Ace. I was wrong to leave you. I didn't know what to do, but now I do." "I won't leave again," Jackson said, his voice low. After a while, Ace approached. Each step he took was filled with caution, as if he were testing Jackson. But he didn't run away. He stood right in front of Jackson, staring at him, as if trying to understand whether Jackson had truly changed. Jackson raised his hand but did not touch Ace immediately. He kept his hand suspended in the air as an invitation, a way for Ace to decide on his own. Ace sniffed Jackson's hand for a long time, and finally he raised his head and gently touched Jackson's palm. It was a small gesture, but one full of meaning. Jackson felt like a part of Ace was beginning to return. But he wasn't rushing it. He knew that regaining Ace's trust couldn't happen overnight. "We will start over, right?" Jackson said, looking at Ace with a small smile. Ace didn't reply with words, but the gentle wag of his tail was the clearest answer. Jackson felt a part of him return. He might not be able to change the past, but he could start fresh today. But what would happen next? Could Ace fully return to his old self? Jackson didn't know, but he was determined never to give up. Their relationship, though interrupted, would be rebuilt, no matter how long it took. Days went by, and Jackson and Ace began to reconnect. Their bond couldn't immediately return to how it once was, but each day a little trust and understanding were slowly built. They were no longer strangers, but were gradually becoming friends, walking through challenges and trials together. One morning, Jackson woke up early as usual. The soft light filtered through the window, illuminating the quiet space in the small house. Ace lay on the old rug, his eyes still vigilant, but the look in them had changed. No longer filled with worry or confusion, there was now a sense of peace and calm. Jackson stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh morning air. He sat on the doorstep, his eyes on Ace, who was playing freely, no longer fearful like before. A sense of relief washed over Jackson. He remembered the days when everything had been chaotic, when his relationship with Ace had been damaged. But now everything had changed. He had learned that relationships, like friendship or love, couldn't be built in just one night, but through patience, understanding, and true care. With a small smile, Jackson called Ace over. This time, there was no hesitation or worry. Ace ran over, wagging his tail happily. Jackson smiled softly, extending his hand for Ace to come closer. Ace leaned his head into Jackson's hand without hesitation. "We are starting over, right?" Jackson whispered. Ace didn't need to answer with words, but he licked Jackson's hand gently. That was his answer, a response without words. Days continued to pass, and Jackson and Ace built a new life together. They were no longer strangers, but a strong team. Every day, every step was a challenge, but it was also an opportunity for them to prove that their relationship was not only healed, but becoming stronger. One evening, as the sun set, Jackson and Ace stood side by side, gazing out at the distant ocean. The scene was peaceful, with only the sound of the waves and the gentle breeze. Jackson looked into Ace's eyes, feeling a deep sense of happiness. "We have been through a lot of challenges, have we not?" Jackson said, his voice full of emotion. But in the end, we found each other again. And that is what matters most. Ace turned his head and looked into Jackson's eyes, his gaze full of trust. Neither of them needed to say anything more. They understood that they had been through the challenges, and now it was time to enjoy the happy moments together. As the last light of the sun faded away, Jackson and Ace stood there in a moment of peace and perfection. Their relationship was not only healed, but had become a strong and steadfast bond. Love, patience, and forgiveness had helped them reach the fulfilling ending they both deserved. And from that day on, Jackson and Ace walked together on a new path, no longer distant, no longer afraid, only with trust and an unbreakable friendship. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.